The frost hadn't yet melted from the fence rails when the sound of hooves broke the morning silence. The auction yard was nearly empty. Just a few ranchers stamping their boots, breath steaming like smoke in the pale light. And in the center pen stood the horse no one wanted. His coat was once a proud chestnut, but now it clung dull and patchy to a frame too thin to hold dignity. Chains hung loose around his neck, clinking softly when he shifted. One eye was clouded, the other flicked between the ground and the crowd as though bracing for the next blow. The auctioneer called him Lot 47, but the men whispered other names. Crippled mean waste of feed. Daniel Hayes stood at the back, gloves in his pocket, a small slip of paper crumpled in his fist. He hadn't come to buy anything. His ranch was barely surviving, his hands rough from years of work that no longer paid. But something in that pen, something in the way the horse stood alone, shaking but unbroken, held him still. The auctioneer's voice rang sharp against the wind. "Who'll take him for $10? Barely the price of the rope he's wearing." "Anybody?" Silence. Then laughter. A man near the gate spat and muttered, "You'd be better off burying him." Daniel's voice rose before his mind could stop it. "I'll take him." Heads turned. Someone laughed outright. "You? Hayes, you can't even feed your own fence posts." Another voice, kinder but pitying, said, "Don't throw good grain after bad, son." But Daniel's gaze didn't leave the horse. He saw ribs and scars, yes, but also a tremor in the animal's throat, a spark that hadn't gone out. He stepped closer to the pen as the auctioneer shrugged. "Sold. $10 even." When Daniel reached for the rope, the horse flinched violently, jerking his head so the chain scraped his cheek. For a heartbeat Daniel froze. Then he spoke softly, low and even. "Easy, boy. No one's here to hurt you." His words were almost lost to the wind, but the horse stilled just enough to listen. They loaded him into a battered wagon that groaned beneath his weight. The men kept smirking, but Daniel barely noticed. As the wheels creaked over frozen dirt, he watched the horse's reflection in the small rear mirror. Eyes still wary, body still taut, but not collapsing. There was something stubborn in that survival, something Daniel recognized too well. The road home was long and empty. The field stretched out, pale and lifeless, dotted with dry grass that whispered in the breeze. Daniel's breath fogged the glass as he muttered, half to himself, "You and me, we've both seen better days." The horse flicked his ears at the sound, uncertain. By the time they reached the ranch, dusk had begun to settle. The barn smelled of hay and dust, the air inside warmer than outside. Daniel unhooked the rope slowly, expecting a kick or lunge, but the horse only stood trembling. When Daniel turned to leave, he heard a soft exhale behind him, almost like a sigh. He paused at the door, glancing back. "You'll need a name," he murmured. The word ash came to him, quiet fitting, something that remembered fire even after it burned out. Outside, the last of the daylight faded over the hills, staining the snow a deep gold. The world was silent except for the faint rustle of hooves shifting in straw. Daniel stood for a long moment, feeling the weight of the day settle on him. The wind moved through the cracks in the barn wood, carrying with it a whisper of something fragile but alive, like trust waiting to be born. He closed the door gently behind him, unaware that this single act of mercy would begin to rebuild two broken lives, one slow breath at a time. Snow came early that winter, burying the ranch beneath a silence so deep it seemed to swallow sound itself. Each morning Daniel rose before dawn, his breath hanging white as he carried water to the barn. Inside, Ash stood in the half-light, ribs still visible, but eyes clearer than they'd been a week before. The horse no longer pulled away when Daniel entered, though he kept his distance. A fragile truce born not of trust, but exhaustion. Daniel moved slowly, speaking in the same even tone every day. "Easy now. No one's asking you to fight." He never reached too quickly, never force contact. He left grain in a bucket near the stall's edge and turned his back, pretending to busy himself with mending tools. Only when he wasn't looking would Ash begin to eat, his jaw working cautiously, each mouthful a quiet surrender. The days blurred into one another. Snow pressed against the windows, the roof groaned under its weight, and Daniel's world became a rhythm of chores and whispers. He had little else, no family left, no neighbors close enough to visit. Sometimes he spoke to fill the silence, telling the horse about the weather, about fences that needed fixing, about the way his wife used to hum while brushing her mare. She said horses remember kindness longer than pain, he murmured once, his voice breaking halfway through the sentence. Ash flicked an ear toward him, then shifted his weight. It wasn't understanding, not yet, but something passed between them, faint and human. One morning, Daniel found the horse's water bucket empty and his blanket pushed aside. Ash had torn at the rope in the night, the old chain still attached to his halter, scraping his neck raw. Daniel cursed softly under his breath, cutting the metal free with a pair of pliers. "You don't need that anymore," he said, tossing the rusted links into a corner. The sound of them hitting the wall echoed like a promise. He began calling him by name, Ash. At first, the horse ignored it, but over time, the syllable seemed to carry weight. When Daniel spoke it, Ash's ears would tilt, his head lowering slightly as if the word itself was easier to bear than silence. Weeks passed. The snow hardened into ice. Smoke rose from the chimney in thin, stubborn ribbons. Each evening Daniel brushed the horse's coat, removing clumps of mud and old scars hidden beneath. The first time his hand slid across the horse's neck without flinch or recoil, something in his chest eased for the first time in years. A storm came mid-January, howling across the plains with relentless wind. The power flickered out. The barn door banged open and slammed shut again. Daniel rushed outside, his coat whipping against him. He found Ash trembling in the corner of the corral, mane whipped wet, eyes wide with panic. "Easy, boy," Daniel said, stepping into the storm's fury. The horse backed away, hooves slipping on ice. Daniel didn't chase. He simply stood, letting the snow sting his face until Ash stopped trembling. Slowly, painfully, he extended his hand, blanket in his grip. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ash's nostrils flared. For a moment Daniel thought he'd bolt again, but then the horse stepped forward. Just one step, enough for Daniel to place the blanket gently over his shoulders. When it was done, Daniel exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "There," he said quietly, voice rough. "That's all we needed." They stood like that for a long time. Two silhouettes in the snow, bound by nothing but the shared understanding that survival was not the same as living. Outside, the wind tore at the fences and rattled the world apart. But inside the storm, something had shifted. The man and the horse were no longer strangers. And though the night howled with fury, Daniel felt, for the first time in years, that spring might still come. By the time the snow began to melt, the ranch had changed. The fences still leaned, the roof still leaked, but the silence no longer felt hollow. Ash followed Daniel now from the barn to the fields, his gait still uneven but steadier with each passing day. When Daniel opened the gate in the mornings, the horse would pause beside him, as if waiting for permission. "Go on," Daniel would say softly, and the animal would trot into the open pasture, breath turning to mist in the cool air. It was a small thing, yet it felt like victory. Spring was late to arrive, the ground soggy and slow to wake. Daniel worked from dawn to dusk, mending what the storms had broken. Every so often, he'd stop and rest his palm against Ash's flank, feeling warmth beneath the new muscle. "You're coming back," he murmured one morning, brushing stray hay from the horse's mane. "Guess we both are." In the weeks that followed, he began light training. Nothing forced, only rhythm and patience. He led Ash along the fence line, speaking in low tones, teaching him to follow a cue rather than a pull. When the rope tightened, Ash would flinch, eyes flashing with old memory. But Daniel never raised his voice, never struck. He simply dropped the rope and stepped back. Each time, the horse calmed a little faster. Trust, Daniel realized, wasn't built through control. It was offered, and sometimes returned. Word spread through the nearby towns that the broken horse had lived through winter. A few neighbors came to see for themselves. Clint Barrow leaned against the corral one afternoon, shaking his head. "Can't believe that thing's still breathing," he said. "You ought to put him down before he hurts someone." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "He's not dangerous," he replied quietly. "Just remembering who he is." Clint snorted. "You can't heal madness." Daniel didn't answer, but as Clint walked away, Ash took a step closer, standing between them. It was subtle but enough. The message didn't need words. The first real test came without warning. A thunderstorm rolled in from the west, dark and fast, the kind that made the air hum before the first strike. The cattle panicked, bellowing across the pasture, hooves churning mud. Daniel rushed out, the wind tearing at his coat. Lightning split the sky, illuminating chaos. Fences breaking, animals scattering toward the ravine. His breath caught. He knew that place too well. It was where his wife's horse had fallen years ago. He froze, memories slicing through him like rain. Then he saw movement at the edge of the field. Ash pacing near the open gate, nostrils flaring. Daniel shouted over the wind, "Stay there." But the horse didn't. He bolted into the storm, a streak of chestnut cutting through the sheets of rain. Daniel cursed under his breath, grabbed the bridle, and followed. Down by the ravine, a young calf lay trapped against the rocks, bawling in fear as the water surged below. Ash reached it first, stamping his hooves near the edge to keep it from slipping further. Daniel's boots sank deep into mud as he approached, heart pounding. He reached the calf, shoving his shoulder beneath its weight. "Easy now," he grunted, straining. The ground trembled. For a breathless moment, he felt it give way beneath him. But Ash lunged forward, bracing his body, pulling both man and calf back to solid ground. They stood drenched and gasping, the storm breaking apart above them. Daniel pressed his forehead against Ash's neck, water dripping from his hat brim. "You saved him," he whispered, though his voice cracked as if saying something else entirely. When the thunder finally faded, Ash lifted his head, eyes bright and alive, no trace of fear left in them. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in Daniel's chest, a heartbeat of awe and gratitude. He knew, without speaking, that something irreversible had shifted. Whatever had been taken from this horse by cruelty, whatever had died in Daniel long ago, both had now been given back by courage. And though neither of them knew what tomorrow held, they had already crossed the worst of the night, together. The days that followed carried the scent of thawed earth and grass. The pastures turned green again, soft underfoot, alive with sound. Daniel woke to birdsong instead of wind, and found himself smiling without realizing it. Ash grazed freely now, muscles rippling beneath a coat that shone in the morning light. The scars were still there, faint lines along his shoulders and flank, but they no longer looked like wounds. They looked like proof. One afternoon, Daniel hitched the wagon and brushed the dust from his jacket. The county fair had returned. The same place where he'd bought Ash for $10 and a chorus of laughter. It wasn't pride that pulled him there, only something quieter, like closure. He led Ash toward the trailer, murmuring, "Time to show them what living looks like." The horse followed willingly, no rope needed. The fairground buzzed with noise when they arrived. Children ran between stalls, music drifted from loudspeakers, and the smell of fried bread filled the air. Daniel guided Ash through the crowd, each step steady and calm. People turned to look. A few recognized him, the fool who'd wasted money on a dying horse. Their eyes widened as they saw the animal before them, tall, strong, gleaming with life. Someone whispered, "That can't be the same one." Another said, "He was half dead last winter." Daniel didn't answer. He stopped near the center ring, where young horses were being shown for auction. The same auctioneer stood at the platform, older now, voice rough from years of calling. His words faltered when he spotted Daniel. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, stepping down. "That your horse?" Daniel nodded, resting a hand against Ash's neck. "It is." The man circled the horse, shaking his head in disbelief. "You worked a miracle, Hayes." Daniel's smile was small but real. "No, he just remembered how to live." A few onlookers clapped quietly, though Daniel hadn't meant to perform. He unhooked the small pouch from his belt and pulled out a rusted length of chain, the same one that had once cut into Ash's neck. The crowd stilled as he dropped it in the dirt. The sound was soft, almost swallowed by the wind, but it carried far. "He doesn't wear shackles anymore," Daniel said simply. "Neither do I." The auctioneer nodded, unable to speak. Daniel led Ash out of the ring and toward the open field beyond the fairground. The noise faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of grass. When they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Daniel loosened the bridle and stepped back. The horse hesitated, nostrils flaring, eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, the world felt suspended. Two beings who had rebuilt each other, standing at the edge of freedom. "Go on," Daniel said softly. "You've earned it." Ash broke into a gallop, mane catching sunlight like fire. He moved with a grace that erased every trace of what had once been broken. Dust rose behind him in golden spirals as he cut across the field, the sound of hooves echoing against the open sky. Daniel watched until the shape of him blurred into the horizon, until the ache in his chest became something tender instead of heavy. He sat on the grass, the chain cool in his palm. Around him, the world smelled of rain and life. He thought of his wife, of the promise he'd never spoken aloud, to keep believing in things that could heal. A breeze passed through, carrying the faintest sound, like the rhythm of hooves over distant earth. Daniel smiled, whispering to the wind, "Run far, my friend." As the sun dipped low, light pooled across the land in shades of amber and gold. The rancher who had once been broken sat alone on the hill, yet he did not feel alone. Somewhere out there, a horse that had known shackles was running free, and in that freedom, both of them had found their strength again.